Now, let's discuss the political economy and international trade. Chapter 5 explains classical trade theories showing that countries benefits from free trade by specializing in what they do best. Free trade leads to more efficient use of resources and promotes economic growth. This chapter focuses on the political side of the trade. Even though many countries support free trade, governments often intervene to protect certain domestic industries or jobs. Like for example, in US, subsidies help cotton farmers to stay competitive. But this also hurts the farmers in poor countries by lowering global cotton prices. This chapter explores why government intervene in trade and the tools that they use such as tariffs and subsidies and the political and economic reasons behind each actions. Free trade policy uses tools like tariffs, subsidies, import quotas, and other in order to control the international trade. Now let's discuss what is tariff. Tariff are taxes on import. They help domestic producing producers goods and by making foreign goods more expensive, but they also raise prices for consumers. Government earns revenue from tariffs, but they can also hurt economic efficiency by protecting industries that are less competitive. Like for example, in US tariffs on steel on 2002, it raised the steel prices which helps producers but hurting manufacturers that needed the steel. Tariffs often benefits producers and government, but harms consumers and reduces the overall economic efficiency. Now let's proceed to subsidies. Subsidies are the government payment that support domestic producers by lowering their costs. This can be in the form of cash grants, tax breaks, or lower interest loans, helping firms compete with imports and sell more abroad. Agriculture receives most subsidies, especially in US, Europe, and Japan. Other industries like aerospace also benefit from it. Subsidies can boost countries' global competitiveness, especially in key industries. However, they often protect inefficient producers, encourage overproduction, and reduce global trade efficiency. Studies show that removing farm subsidies could greatly increase global trade and raise world income. Import quotas and voluntary export restraints. Import quota is the direct restriction on the quali- uh, quantity of some good that may be imported into country. Import quotas limit how much of a product can be brought into a country. This protects domestic producers but raises prices for consumers. Sometimes only certain firms or countries are allowed to import within the set limits. A common hybrid of a quota and tariffs is known as a tariff-free quota. Under a tariff-free quota, a lower tariff rate is applied to import within the quota than those over the quota. Tariff-rate quotas allow a set amount to be imported and a low tariff, but higher tariffs apply beyond that limit. It is common in agriculture. Voluntary export restraints. These are the limit on exports imposed by the exporting countries. Usually, it is under the pressure from the importing country. Like for example, in Japan, the limited car exports to the US during 1980s. Both import quotas and VERs or voluntary export restraints benefit local producers by reducing competition, but they hurt consumers by increasing prices. This can lead to the to this can lead to quota rents, in which foreign countries producers earn extra profits due to the limited supply. Quota rent is the extra profit that producers make when supply is artificially limited. by an import quota. If a domestic industry lacks the capacity to meet the demand, an import quota can raise prices for both the domestically produced and the imported goods. Local content requirement. Local content requirement are the rules that require a certain portion of a product to be made locally, either the quantity or the value of the product. These rules help protect domestic industries and jobs by limiting foreign competition. They are used in both developing and developed countries. Like in the US, they have the Buy America Act in which it requires the government to contract to favor American-made goods. While local content while local content rules benefit local producers, the raise the raise the cost they raise the cost production and lead to higher prices for consumers. Like other trade restrictions, they help producers but hurt the consumers. Administrative policies. Or produce These are the informal rules or producers used by government to make importing goods harder. This includes things like excessive inspections or slow custom processes. Countries like Japan and France have used these tactics to protect local producers. Anti-dumping policies are meant to stop foreign companies from selling goods below fair market value what we call dumping, which can harm local industries. If dumping is proven, special tariffs or also called anti-dumping duties are imposed to protect the domestic producers. The case for government intervention. Government intervene in international trade for two main reasons. The first one is the political reason. The government intervene to protect specific groups such as local producers, even if it may harm others like the consumers. And the second reason is to improve the overall wealth and economic strength of a country that and this can benefit to everyone.
Political arguments for government intervention cover a range of issues, including protects jobs and industries from foreign competition, responds to national security concerns, addresses consumer safety by regulating unsafe products, retaliating against unfair foreign competition, protecting consumers from dangerous products, furthering the goals of foreign policy, and advancing the human rights of individuals in exporting countries. Protecting jobs and industries. Perhaps the most common political argument for government intervention is that it is necessary for protecting jobs and industries from unfair foreign competition. The tariffs President George Bush placed on imports of foreign steel in March 2002 were designed to do this. The CAP was designed to protect the jobs of Euro Common agricultural farmers by restricting imports and Europe's consumers dearly. This is true of many attempts to protect jobs and industries through prices. However, the cash prices that resulted from the CAP have cost Europe government intervention. National security countries sometimes argue that it is necessary to protect certain industries because they are important for national security. Defense related industries often get this kind of attention. Although not as common as it is used to be, this argument is still made. Those in favor of protecting the United States semiconductor industry from foreign competition, for example, argue that semiconductors are now such important components of defense products, it would be dangerous to rely primarily on foreign producers for them. The United States government has used the threat of punitive trade sanctions to try to get the Chinese government to enforce its intellectual property laws. A country that is being pressured may not back down and instead respond to the imposition of punitive tariffs by raising trade barriers of its own. Many governments have long had regulations to protect consumers from unsafe products. The indirect effect of such regulations often is to limit or ban the importation of such products. For example, in 2003, several countries, including Japan and South Korea, decided to ban imports of American beef after a single case of mad cow diseases was found in Washington state. The ban was motivated to protect consumers from what was seen to be an unsafe product. Governments sometimes use trade policy to support their foreign policy objectives. A government may grant preferential trade terms to a country with which it wants to build strong relations. Trade policy has also been used several times to pressure or punish rogue states that do not abide by international law or norms. Protecting and promoting human rights in other countries is an important element of foreign policy for many democracies. Governments sometimes use trade policy to try to improve the human rights policies of trading partners. For years, the most obvious example of this was the annual debate in the United States over whether to grant most favored nation or MFN status to China. However, China did not join the World Trade Organization until 2001. So historically, the decision of whether to grant MFN status to China decision was made more difficult by the perception that China had a poor human rights record. They argue that the best way to change the internal human rights stance of a country is to engage it through international trade. Now let's go to the economic arguments. The economic arguments focus on improving national wealth and benefiting consumers and producers overall. The infant industry argument is by far the oldest economic argument for government intervention. Alexander Hamilton proposed it in 1792. According to this argument, many developing countries have a potential comparative advantage in manufacturing, but new manufacturing industries cannot initially compete with established industries in developed countries. To allow manufacturing to get a hold, the arguments support new industries until they have grown strong enough to meet international competition. GATT has recognized the infant industry argument as a legitimate reason for protectionism. Nevertheless, many economists remain critical of this argument for two main reasons. First, protection of manufacturing from foreign competition does no good unless the protection helps make the industry efficient. Second, the infant industry argument relies on an assumption that firms are unable to make efficient long-term investments by borrowing money from the domestic or international capital market. Consequently, governments have been required to subsidize long-term investments. Given the development of global capital markets over the past 20 years, this assumption no longer looks as valid as it once did. Today, if a developing country has a potential comparative advantage in a manufacturing industry, firms in that country should be able to borrow money from the capital markets to finance the required investments. Some new trade theorists have proposed the strategic trade policy argument. The new trade theory argues that in industries in which the existence of substantial economies of scale implies that the world market will profitably support only a few firms, countries may predominate in the export of certain products simply because they had firms that were able to capture first mover advantages. The strategic trade policy argument has two components. First, it is argued that by appropriate actions, government can help raise national income if it can somehow ensure that the firm or firms that gain first mover advantages in an industry are domestic rather than foreign enterprises. The second component of the strategic trade policy argument is that it might pay a government to intervene in an industry by helping domestic firms overcome the barriers to entry created by foreign firms that have already reaped first mover advantages. This argument underlies government support of Airbus industry, Boeing's major competitor. Krugman argues that a strategic trade policy aimed at establishing domestic firms in a dominant position in a global industry is a beggar thy neighbor policy that boosts national income at the expense of other countries. A country that attempts to use such policies will probably provoke retaliation. In many cases, the resulting trade war between two more interventionist governments will leave all countries involved worse off than if they had adopted a hands-off approach in the first place. If the United States government were to respond to the Airbus subsidy by increasing its own subsidies to Boeing, for example, the result might be that the subsidies would cancel each other out. Krugman may be right about the danger of a strategic trade policy leading to a trade war. The problem, however, is how to respond when one's competitors are already being supported by government subsidies. According to Krugman, the answer is probably not to engage in retaliatory action but to help establish rules of the game that minimize the case of trade distorting subsidies. This is what the World Trade Organization seeks to do.
Experience to read. The WTO is a global organization promotes free trade by setting rules, resolving disputes, and helping countries negotiate trade agreements. It has boosted global trade but faced anti-semitism for favoring richest nations and being slow to adapt to modern issues. WTO as global police. The WTO acts like a global trade police by enforcing rules that govern international trade. It ensures countries follow agreed upon trade laws, resolve disputes, and help prevent trade wars. Stability. Some argue it limits national sovereignty and favors powerful incomes. Expanding trade agreements. Expanding trade agreements under the WTO aims to reduce trade barriers, increase market access, and promote global economic growth. These agreements cover goods, service, and intellectual property, helping countries integrate into the global economy. However, progress is often slow due to differing national. The WTO in Seattle, a watershed. The WTO Seattle Ministerial Conference 1999 was a watershed moment marked by massive protests against globalization, labor exploitation, and environmental harm. It exposed deep division among WTO members and sparked global debate and unfairness of trade rules, ultimately ending new trade negotiations. The future of the WTO, unresolved issues and the Doha Round. The future of the WTO faces challenges due to in-service and intellectual property rights. The Doha Round launched in 2001 to address these concerns and promote development has stalled due to disagreements between developed and developing countries, leaving the WTO's roles and effectiveness in questions. Anti-dumping actions are trade measures taken by a country to protect its domestic industries from foreign companies selling goods below market value. The WTO allows such actions if dumping harm local producers, but they must follow strict rules to prevent unfair protectionism. Protecting intellectual property. Protecting intellectual property under the WTO is handled through the TRIPS agreements, which sets minimum standard for IP rights globally. It aims to encourage innovations and protect creators, but has sparked debate over access to medicine and technology, especially in developing countries. Market access for non-agricultural goods and services. Market access for non-agricultural goods and services is a key focus of WTO negotiations aiming to reduce tariffs and trade barriers. The goal is a post-global trade in industries like manufacturing and service. Progress has been slow due to disagreement between developed and developing nations over the terms of access. A new round of talks, Doha. The Doha round of talks, launched in 2001, aimed to address global trade imbalance by focusing on issues like agricultural subsidies, market access, and development. For poorer nations, however, it faced deadlock due to disagreements between developed and developing countries, leading to its slow progress and limited outcome. Trade barriers and firms' strategy. Trade barriers such as tariffs, quotas, and regulations can impact a firm's strategy by increasing costs, limiting market access, and affecting competitiveness. To navigate these barriers, firms may adapt by shifting productions, buying for favorable trade policies, of focusing on innovations to maintain a competitive edge. Policy implications. The policy implications of the WTO primarily involve managing protests, ensuring security at global trade meetings, and addressing concerns about civil liberties, enforcement, must balance crowd control, public safety, and protect of protest night while handling potential and conflict of conduct during WTO events.
To sum it all up, government intervention in international trade reflects a complex interplay of political, economic, and social considerations. Policies are shaped by a need to protect industries, ensure consumer safety, promote national security, and influence foreign policy. The evolution of GATT to WTO or World Trade Organization has threatened the enforcement of trade rules, underscoring the ongoing challenges of balancing domestic needs against global economic integration.